Welcome to We Can Be,
the podcast of the Heinz Endowments,
where we work to build
an exemplary,
sustainable region
where everyone
prospers and belongs.
It's a disappointing fate for two local newspapers as they turn out their last issues before closing down,
leaving several small towns without their hometown newspaper.
Like many newspapers all across the nation, this week it is coming to an end.
The end of an era for a local paper. This week, the newsroom went dark.
Welcome to We Can Be. I'm your host, Chris DeCardy. Facing ongoing pressures from broken business models, the fierce competition for eyeballs, and increasingly the actions of our own government, independent journalism that millions depend on to hold their elected officials and civic leaders accountable is facing increasing risk. Today's guest has 2 decades of journalism experience and has built his impressive career on a commitment to challenging these trends. Chris Baxter is the CEO, president, and founding editor of Spotlight PA, an independent, nonpartisan, and nonprofit news organization dedicated to holding those in power accountable. Founded in 2019 to address Pennsylvania's declining state of local journalism, Spotlight PA has had substantial impact that has made it a model of independent journalism for other states across our nation. Their investigations have saved taxpayers an estimated $20 million and prompted 36 local, state, and federal policy changes that enhance transparency across the Commonwealth. Chris was awarded the 2025 News Media Industry Executive of the Year by the Pennsylvania News Media Association for his innovation, integrity, and commitment to the future of local news. He leads Spotlight PA's partnerships with over 90 newsrooms, the largest collaborative distribution network of its kind in the nation. Chris Baxter, welcome to We Can Be.
Thanks for having me.
I'm delighted to be in this conversation, but I also, on one level, wish this wasn't a conversation that we are having right now.
Yeah.
Because what has been happening to journalism has been happening for quite a long while now. So for you, what is the state of journalism? What is the state of our news media when we've had more than 3,200 newspapers across the country closing in the last couple of decades? And you can build that story out from there.
For a long time in this country, the vast majority of originally produced journalism happened to be subsidized by a very lucrative commercial business model, and that was newspapers. And that was a great business to be in. And it was easy to wall off the journalism because on the commercial side, they were making so much money. For a long, long time, newspaper companies, their primary customer was advertisers, not monetizing the journalism, not the subscriber. And that business model collapsed. I mean, with the onset of the internet, ad revenue began to, shift digitally. Newspapers were very slow to recognize what was happening. And then when they did shift, they shifted to the model they knew, which was advertising. And that's why at the very beginning, when we started to see this shift, basically none of them thought to charge for the journalism. And the digital ad revenue can't keep pace with the losses that they're seeing on the print side. Even the ones that are doing great, growing digital revenue, 150% year over year, that's not making up for the real dollar losses. And so they have to shrink. They have to cut reporting staff. They have to cut the size of the newspaper. They might reduce the printing or get rid of it altogether. And so we begin to see the quality decline. We begin to see the depth of the reporting decline. And at the same time, they're turning around to the consumer and saying, you now need to pay more for this newspaper. And so most logical consumers, you and me, Chris, right, we look at it and we say, well, I'm not getting what I used to get, and you're asking me to pay more, so I'm probably not going to go for that.
What has the impact been on consumers of news, and especially in communities?
Yeah, it's meant fewer reporters, less coverage, less journalism overall, but perhaps hit hardest is what we at Spotlight PA view as to be the core of journalism, which is that independent accountability and oversight. So few news organizations have any bandwidth to do anything that takes more time, more effort, more resources. They're just trying to cover the day-to-day and stay alive. And so we see, so much less coverage and less awareness in the community. Communities also lost an institution, right, that was invested in the good of the community. Newspapers weren't just about producing journalism. They were also a very active member of the business community, of platforming discussion, catalyzing change. They may not have a perspective on where that change should go, but they were a force. And as they have contracted and also as ownership has consolidated, we see that these organizations really have abdicated that role.
In the long term, when you don't have good journalism, fact-based journalism at the local level, what happens to members of a community, and specifically what happens to members' trust in all aspects of the community that they live in?
Right. So there's a macro level and there's a micro level answer. And the macro level answer is that trust in journalism, after the sort of age where, the big nightly newscasts, the Walter Cronkites, where a lot of trust was built in that relationship. A lot of trust was generated and built at the local level, right? Where you would have an interaction with your local reporter who you knew or your local media outlet who you knew. So if you look at the data, and the most recent study came out last week in terms of all-time lows of trust in the media, but if you ask that question about people's trust in their local institution, it's much, much higher. So on the macro level, we have really the core of where trust in journalism was built, was constructed, being the most hollowed out from the crisis we're seeing. At the same time, the national media has gotten incredibly loud. And I use media as sort of a broad term nationally to include social media and all the other things. So it's incredibly loud, and at the local level, people are getting a lot less, and it's much quieter, and that sort of trust-building engine is slowing. So on the micro level, my biggest concern is the process of engagement with our democracy. People who might engage with their town hall, it might go to a city council meeting or a zoning hearing board meeting, right? Now, in so many places across the Commonwealth and across our country, people who engage in that process and find something that they think is not right, they are trying to get more information. It used to be that once they tried the official channels and got stuck, there was kind of a pressure release valve. And that release valve was the press, was an independent media, was your local reporter, right? And now, in so many places, that release valve does not exist. And so I think at its best, people will just hit that wall and disengage, which is not a good thing. But at its worst, people will hit that wall, disengage, and become jaded by the process, right? Or begin to turn against the process because it's not being responsive to them. And that, to me, over time, is the biggest threat of not having, again, that release valve that independent media, but especially, again, independent media that was able to investigate and get to the bottom of things can cause.
So take us to 2019 and take us to Pennsylvania. Why Spotlight PA? Why that moment? And what have you been seeking to do given the landscape you just described?
Yeah, so if you look on a per capita basis, as newspapers had to make tough decisions and shrink, the first thing they usually cut was their Washington correspondent because they figured, man, somebody else can cover Washington. And the second person they usually cut was the State House correspondent, and they focused, what they had left locally. This happens at the exact same time. Two other things are happening. Number one, there's a shift in our politics that we can trace in the past 15-ish years to move away from trying to get things done through Washington, which is very much kind of stuck in the mud, and instead focus on state capitals as the incubator for new and novel legal and policy approaches. Anything we've seen in the past decade, new and novel approaches to abortion, gun rights, LGBTQ rights, education, you name it, they're being born out of state capitals and duplicated. So this is happening at the same time. We have vastly fewer people watching what's going on. That's number one. And then number two, 2019, of course, is we're on the doorstep of the pandemic when government, but especially state governments, are about to literally enter your living room in terms of decisions they're making over your life. So Spotlight was launched to really restore accountability coverage and in-depth coverage of the state capitol and statewide issues. Of course, we didn't know a pandemic was coming, and boy, what a really important time to have a statewide newsroom, not only covering those, but able to connect information between communities in Harrisburg and communities to one another.
So you're not a traditional newspaper with reporters and editors and a print copy and just a website. How do people in Pennsylvania get the news that you are reporting, editing, and distributing?
We want to be everywhere. And so, yes, we have reporters and editors and, the typical journalistic journalistic process. We have our own website, social channels, 60,000 newsletter subscribers across the state. But we also make all of our work available to any other media outlet of any type and kind that wants it at no cost. So we now republish our work through 130 news outlets all across the Commonwealth.
Well, as we approach a crucial election in Pennsylvania and across the country, we're going to turn to our new partners, Spotlight PA.
We want to turn to our partners at Spotlight PA.
Spotlight PA's independent civic journalism includes a series of deep investigations into our Commonwealth's medical marijuana industry.
Our partnership with Spotlight PA will continue bringing you vital, in-depth reporting on key stories that impact Pennsylvania.
We, on a given day can publish a story and reach a far greater audience than anyone else. And also, really importantly, is we are able to surface stories from particular communities or regions of the state and get them in front of other parts of the state. And as we've seen in the most recent budget impasse, how important it is, to have that kind of shared information basis, because it's so easy to play on our differences. And the only true antidote to that is a shared understanding and a shared source of information.
So dig into that, because that starts to get to the acute moment, which is that chronic dissolution of the media and the way it used to be structured, plus a whole lot of other changes in society, get to this polarization that for many people feels like it is going to be a permanent state in this country. How do you think about this moment? How do you show up? And do you believe there's a pathway through based on how you are covering and reporting the news?
Amid all of the chaos, destruction of the industry and the turmoil and everything else, there's great opportunity to retake journalism. We need to retake it back to its roots, right? If we think about free press, it's the only profession specifically mentioned in the Constitution. And our purpose is to preserve the core elements of journalism that fulfill that mission in a free society. And in our mind, that's two things. Number one, it's the independent accountability, the fourth estate. It is the fourth independent pillar, check and balance on our three other branches of government and really any institution of power. Number two, it's public service, meaning in service to the people. And I think journalism, for so many different reasons, has lost that orientation. And not to be overlooked is the fact that with so much of our journalism enmeshed in for-profit corporations, eventually, with enough financial pressure, the goals and purposes and what a for-profit company seeks will come into conflict with the ultimate purpose of journalism in service to the people.
How do you pay for all of this if one of the reasons that transition has happened from the old media age to this new media age is the constant need for clickbait and the cheapest way to get those clicks? You're doing exactly the opposite. How do you pay for it?
We need to reorient the relationship of people's journalism one-to-one with an organization that's by Pennsylvanians, for Pennsylvanians, in Pennsylvania. We need to restore the connective tissue between news in a community and a community's needs. When you start to orient coverage not around political frameworks, but actually think about, okay, how can we actually help you in your day-to-day life? If you cast this vote, if you elect this person, these are the policies they're saying they're doing, and this is what that will mean to you. And we don't care how you vote. We just want you to vote in your own best interest. I think people are actually quite hungry for a trusted source of information. They're quite hungry for someone who cares about their community. And when you can actually deliver information that is useful and that is of a depth and quality that they can trust and they can rely on, they will in turn support it. And we see that in our experience. It's not an unwillingness to pay for news. It's a dissatisfaction with the quality, the orientation. We are essentially rebuilding an industry from the bottom up. And I think there's incredible power and incredible potential in taking that approach. I tell you what, every room I talk to, no matter whether it's full of Democrats, full of Republicans, I spoke to a Republican club, their first meeting after Trump's second election, it was a party, right? And I gave them an hour presentation on Spotlight PA and why our work is important. The entire room was supportive of what we're doing. And so I believe the power is there. I believe the support is there, but it's going to take time. But we need to have those one-on-one conversations. We need to reestablish those relationships. And when we do, the magic happens.
That seems extraordinarily important because where people's eyeballs are going are more and more on social media. With your belief in fact-based reporting, it is still into this cacophony of noise and still into this clickbait culture, which is driving eyeballs. How do you expand audience based on fact, based on your reporting?
We need to get people back focused on the individuals, elected officials that are actually spending the vast majority of their tax dollars and making decisions that affect their day-to-day life. And we need to reflect that in coverage. So we need to, fight back against kind of the noise of the national conversation, which, at its best is a grand distraction, at its worst is a grand delusion, right? That somehow it's always some national threat that's the biggest threat to your life today, Chris, and you need to act now, right? I mean, we've all gotten the political emails from either side,
Sure.
like, if you don't give me $5, I'm going to drop dead, It's like, when in reality, the decisions that are affecting your day-to-day life here, the quality of your roads, schools, safety, institutions, the quality of the downtown, whatever, they're all being made locally and at the state level, but so few people are focused on that. Our job is really to help people refocus on the things that are in their own best interest, right? And the second thing is to, again, reestablish that local relationship. This is an information economy, but our bet at Spotlight PA is the next phase of this is a credibility economy.
Say more about that.
We're all drinking from the fire hose. Information's not the problem. We're all on information overload. And we see now people looking for someone to help them distill that, to help them make sense of that. And that gets to the quality model, and that gets to the local relationship, that we're a locally based organization with local folks who live here, who care about here.
So how has that progression been so far? Starting in 2019, a lot of philanthropic support, including from the Heinz Endowments at the beginning. What is the progression so far about your revenue model, and where does it stand, and where do you hope it goes from here?
I always say we are a quality model. We're not focused on giving you 500 things a day. We're going to give you a few things a day, but they're going to be worth your time. What I love is when I hear someone who, supports Spotlight PA and they say, I don't read everything all day long. I'm not a news junkie, but when I see Spotlight PA's logo, I stop and I read from top to bottom because I know it's worth my time. That to me is kind of the heart, because people are hungry to have an institution and have a source that they can trust again. Our first year, we were 6 folks and about $750,000 a year. Today, we're 35 folks, a $4.3 million budget. We are growing. We are launching new community newsrooms across the state. The potential is so much more. Like, it feels like we're just sort of scratching the surface and starting to come into our own.
Every one of our communities has folks that feel like they are not included and that they don't belong within their community.
Yeah.
And as you think about who you are serving and whose story you're helping to tell, how do you think about that part of the equation? It could be recent immigrants. It could be somebody from an industry that has gone away and they are the last ones in their community. We see this again and again where people feel isolated even from their local community. How does your work address that division?
It gets me back to the idea that this is an opportunity to kind of retake journalism. So I think there's incredible power in utility for bringing people back into the fold with journalism. And that is, how do we help people solve real problems in their life? And I don't mean on a kind of macro, I mean on a micro level. And these could be like serious, important things, or maybe less serious, but still, things we care about in our day-to-day life. And I think that can really help bridge divide, because when we help someone solve a problem, the amount of value that's created in terms of loyalty is exponentially higher than a general interaction. So that goes into a lot of things we do. And one of the things is this AI election assistant that we generated, because every election cycle we get tons and tons and tons of questions about the electoral process, which, by the way, is very confusing in Pennsylvania. So we wanted to create a tool that, instead of us being able to answer 200 questions, could help answer 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 questions, and do so accurately and based on our reporting. Because, again, we know that when we answer someone's question, we are generating a different level of value and trust.
So what was the tool and how did it work and how many people used it?
Yeah, so we built it based solely off our content and trusted official sources. It's highly controlled, right? So we can see basically like every answer that it would potentially give, and we can edit those answers. There's a ton of human input, which I think is important to understand. But it's been really successful. I mean, in the last 2 election cycles, it's answered thousands of questions that we couldn't get it to. We've expanded its presence this cycle, so we'll see how much more that increases.
Do you need to hire your own reporters directly? Can you get leads from folks in community? There's a whole lot of push towards citizen-based reporting now. How do you think about your institution and reporters that are on staff, and could you get information reporters from other places?
We need talented professional journalists who can produce investigative, right, and public service journalism at a high level. And that is a difficult task. It is the most difficult aspect of journalism to produce, the most scarce, the most expensive, the most legally treacherous. If it weren't those things, we wouldn't be here and Spotlight wouldn't exist because everyone would do it. We are not afraid at Spotlight PA to say, like, we produce journalism that gets results. We don't have a stake in, which way it goes, but we're trying to move our communities and our state forward in a positive way. Those two things are the most important. So the community's role in that is huge because ultimately the good of the community is up to the community. We don't make the votes. We don't pull the levers of power, nor should we. And frankly, 99% of the time, the best investigative journalism you see or read is because of someone in an institution or in a community that saw something going on and came forward and took incredible risk and often tried to go the official routes, got shut down, and turned to the release valve, right, to get that information out. So the community plays an incredible role in the ability to do this work. We can't just sort of pluck these stories out of thin air.
So what would you lift up? What's an example that you think tells the story at that community level about what you've done that we've been describing here throughout this conversation?
It's not an exaggeration to say we've saved people's lives, we've saved people's homes, we've saved their utilities and gotten them turned back on. We've gotten them through bureaucratic processes where they were stuck and their loved ones hung in a balance. We've helped get loved ones out of prison that shouldn't have been there. We've got laws passed. We've brought lawsuits that have set new statewide precedent. But one I like to focus on in particular because I want people to think of us as an investment. In the early year of the pandemic, we were covering the state labor department. And no one had paid attention from a reporter base to the state labor department in who knows how long. But our reporters, reporting on it and getting to know the people in that department who have not really known a reporter in, again, who knows how long. And eventually, after some time, some of them came to her and they said, what's going on is really, really important. But there's this other story that has been going on here for a long time that nobody knows anything about. And of course, you'd say that to a reporter and we'll be in your living room for dinner immediately. When the state labor department pays too much in unemployment benefits, sometimes it's fraud, but usually it's actually paperwork error. The majority of the time, it's a misunderstanding, it's paperwork error. If it happens, though, you've got to repay that, and you have to repay it with interest. And that interest rate is prescribed in law. Well, it turns out that the state labor department for 10 years had charged a far higher interest rate than was allowed by law. They discovered the error and for the preceding 6 years did nothing. They didn't tell anyone affected. They didn't announce it. They didn't make it known. They did not do anything. We caught wind of it, reported it out, built it on sources, internal documents, the hard work that it takes to get this information. And basically at the same time we hit publish on the story, the Labor Department for the first time admits this error and that it owes $19 million to Pennsylvanians. And so that's, tens of thousands of people who were owed money who likely would have never seen a cent if not for our reporting. There's another great example here in Allegheny County. We did a story on opioid settlement money, and our reporters had realized that Allegheny County had missed out on money because of some paperwork. And so they went to them and they said, hey, was this on purpose? Like, did you purposely do this? And they said, oh, no, actually, that was a mistake. And as a result of that story and that reporting process, the county avoided a $480,000 penalty, money they should have had that they wouldn't have gotten, and likely millions more down the line. For all the impact you might see, go to our website or spotlightpa.org and look at the impact. There's so much that happens simply in the process of reporting. Simply our being present will change the arc of accountability in a room, in a council meeting, in a legislative chamber. And that's very hard to exemplify for people, but we know it because we see it, right? We know how people act, and we know how people act when we're around. That sort of bending the arc of accountability over time is also a really important role of having reporters present that sometimes we lose sight of a little bit.
In fact, I think there's been some kind of independent analysis looking at local governments where there is a news outlet and a reporter and local governments where there is not.
Right.
And statistically significant difference in corruption in the local government that does not have a regular, at least single outlet and a reporter who is there holding them accountable. What are you seeing right now about the license to operate for journalists, about the legal space, about what the government is saying you can and can't do at the federal, state, and local level? Because this has been, in one way, a fight forever. You can go back to the Pentagon Papers, you can go back to Watergate, you can go back before that. There has always been that tension, and there has always been government wanting to put the press in the right place.
The environment is harder than ever, in part because some of the political discourse has really positioned the media as the enemy. And while I think that comes from, again, a focus or an obsession with national media, the real harm happens on the ground with local reporters who aren't in it to be famous, right? Aren't making tons of money. It's not glorious, right? They're doing it because they give a damn. And they're doing it under harsher conditions than ever. And that's why we see so much talent fleeing, frankly. And because so many of the organizations where they can work are not in a position to take care of them and not in a position to support them, and honestly aren't in a position to really prioritize the most important aspect of the work.
Say more about that. Not in a position to support them. So journalists get threats. Journalists get personal threats. They get legal threats. Has that happened with you all? How do you take care of your reporters? How important is that for your credibility and your license to fill the niche that you want to?
Yeah, well, part of the great part about our model is that, if we're in a quality model, we have the resources to back a story and a reporter, and we have resources to go on the offense legally. So we have taken a number of steps on offense to, enforce our rights to public access, public transparency, public records, and so on and so forth. That's really important because it shows people that we're not messing around, and we're also not just parachuting in and then moving on the next day. Like, we're here for the long game, and we're showing people that some of the assumptions that they make nowadays about how a news organization will act because they know they're scared, they have so few resources, they have a corporate owner that doesn't want to take on any risks, so on and so forth. We are constantly disrupting. And by the way, on the other side of the equation, right, in terms of gaining trust and support, we need to do the very same thing. We need to disrupt people's expectations of the news because they have gotten so low. But in being so low, there is opportunity. Let's take this down to the micro level. I answer every single email I get. I ask our staff to answer every email I get. I might get a flaming angry note. I will respond. So many times, simply a response lowers the temperature because it's not what people are expecting. They're expecting us to be some faceless, nameless organization. Again, it goes back to that grassroots sort of humanizing the news, but also taking it back to its roots of it's me in the community in service to you in the community.
So we've talked for a while now, and the passion that you have comes through again and again, the care you have, the belief in what you're doing and how important it is. Where did that come from? Where and why the focus on investigative journalism for you?
It was the concept that I could go to a press conference and cover a press conference, and there would be 20 other reporters there. Well, not nowadays. Maybe there's 10 or 8 or 5. Mm-hmm. If I leave that room and get hit by a bus, there's 4 other people that are going to write that story. And that, to me, it just didn't do it for me. Like, I wanted to know what my value add was, right? Mm-hmm. What was I bringing to the table? That led me to this concept that I really built in a Spotlight PA, which is, if not you, then who journalism. The stories we want, to be able to say we know for certain that had we not done this, it would have never happened. That's, I think, what draws me. That's the value add for me. Not to say that coverage of breaking news and sports and the arts and all that, not to say that's not important. It is. But I think we're at such a pivotal time that we need to make sure that we preserve the core of what journalism is in a free society. And once we do that and have success with that, we can build out from there.
You went back to the beginning of our conversation and noted that we had an era of journalism here that was highly centralized, tightly controlled, and had this firewall that allowed people to have a faith in journalism and for journalism to deliver for people. But that's not where journalism has been historically and always in the U.S. There was an era of yellow journalism in the late 1800s, and it did not go on forever. It turned a corner when you had investigative journalists like Arda Tarbell or Upton Sinclair in the Jungle and outlets like McClure's that started to rebuild that trust. From our conversation, your passion sounds like from that era and that belief. I'm interested if it is, and I'm interested in how do you keep optimistic about what that success can look like going forward, given the onslaught that you are working through right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's drawn from that, and it's really drawn from wanting to provide something of value to people's lives, right? I always say it's 5 things we want to be. We want to be relevant, revelatory, unique, useful, and impactful. And if everything we do revolves around one or more of those things, then we will have success because people value those things, right? You look back historically to the examples you give, right? Clearly, there is a societal value placed on this work. So if we can actually, as my old boss in New Jersey used to say, stop talking about it and put points on the board, like show people what they miss, that they will step forward and support it in the way they can. And so on every given day, I feel so excited because I'm a builder and I've been through so much in my career and seen so much change and good decision, bad decision. I had a lot of ideas about how to do it right. And I love that I can just try. There's no red tape. Let's just give it a shot. Let's see what people say. Let's throw it out there. The flip side of the coin is I just feel so much pressure because if Spotlight fails, there's nothing else coming. It's not going to happen. We're lucky that we got this shot in the first place, right? And so that pressure of what it would mean to us in the Commonwealth if this didn't succeed, if I couldn't walk away being certain that Spotlight PA in some form or fashion will always exist. It's crushing, right? It's crushing to think about.
Well, our mission at the Heinz Endowments is to support the leaders and doers working for an exemplary, sustainable region where everyone prospers and belongs. We don't get there without functioning civic institutions, and we don't get those functioning civic institutions without high-quality reporting so people have accurate information to make decisions in their lives. You and your team have absolutely been putting points on the board.
Thanks.
We are privileged to support you. We are excited where you are right now. This pathway is one that is crucial for us as a nation, and it is inspiring to hear about your leadership and what you're building.
Thank you.
So we end each of our episodes coming back to the beginning. The name of our podcast is We Can Be. If you look to the future and you think about your hope for the future, what do you imagine we as a community, a state, and as a country can be?
I liken it to kind of the currents of the ocean. We know that a strong current in the ocean, this exchange of water, of temperature, of life, is so healthy. And so when I think about Spotlight PA in the Commonwealth, I think of this incredibly robust current of information that has returned more talented reporters and more of the kind of journalism we do to communities all across the state. Yeah, a day where that is true, right? And I think there's so many people in the Commonwealth that want to come and be a part of something like that.
I agree. And thank you for sharing your story with us today, Chris. It's been terrific to have this conversation.
Thanks for having me.
I want to bring in Matt Barron, who leads our civic participation strategy here at the Endowments. You've had the chance to listen to Chris and work with him for a long time, and would love your perspective on what they're doing and why it's important, and how you see them as a challenge to legacy media.
So they, in some ways, have kept some of the old model, the legacy model of journalism. For example, their unionized newsroom. They have a somewhat traditional structure of editors, reporters, beat reporters. So they haven't, totally thrown out the entire playbook and started new. But what they've been able to do is take those things that worked from the old model, access a different way of getting the news out through both their website and their digital platform, but also through the really unique cross-posting and information sharing model they have, where they make every bit of reporting they do available to any outlet who wants to run that piece. What is unique about that is that it really is quite clearly filling some of the gaps that have been created by the collapse of legacy media. Newspapers in small towns that have had to lay off dozens of reporters that don't have the same capacity they used to have are able to access that content and fill those gaps and still provide really high quality information to their residents without having to, find a way to rebuild those newsrooms that have been lost. And Spotlight has been able to build the kinds of partnerships that allow them to get their content in front of those audiences, which then drives people back to their site and is a way to cultivate donors and audiences through partnership, through relationships with legacy media.
It also struck me that they are using an older model of engagement with their readership, too. That he said he answers every single email and expects staff to. That is not how legacy media works anymore in that mix.
Yeah, I was really struck by that too. And I think it is a demonstration of Spotlight PA and Chris and his team really living their values. One of their core values is accountability and holding folks with power accountable. And they're holding themselves accountable to their audience. And I think that it demonstrates to their audience that, as Chris said, we're real people. We're not nameless, faceless folks out there just generating this stuff. We care about what listeners and readers think, and we have, thoughts and opinions about that. I do think it is part of that whole set of kind of rebuilding trust, of demonstrating that accountability matters, and it matters not just for the people they're covering, but for them and their newsrooms and their reporters themselves.
So broaden this out a little bit. Talk a bit about Spotlight PA and what else are we trying to do here to help rebuild trust at a community level?
It's one of the core parts of our program because I think that erosion of trust that we've seen really across the board, trust in government, trust in media, trust in science, trust in fellow community members has plummeted over the last 40 years in our country and in our region. I think Spotlight PA are demonstrating that it is actually still possible to see change, that there are people in positions of power who can be held accountable, who do respond to public pressure and, in some ways, public shaming. And so for us in this program, we fundamentally believe that it's possible to get that trust back. But we believe that institutions, elected officials, universities, you name it, have to act differently because a big part of that erosion of trust, frankly, is earned. People aren't being irrational. They're seeing the change in their lives and they're reacting and they're angry. We have the ability to help some of those institutions, help them see why that trust has been lost, help them look at strategies they can employ to authentically rebuild that trust, and collect the right data through surveys and focus groups and various work that we're supporting to demonstrate what's working and what isn't working and be able to pivot. If we want to have a region that is high quality of life, that is sustainable, where people want to come here and build a life, we have to get to a sense that people trust each other. They trust that the folks that have power are listening to them and want to do the right thing. And Spotlight is an important part of that because they've been able to demonstrate that their reporting leads to material change in the world, and people can see it.
The thing that's interesting about Spotlight is they actually are finding a pathway not to need increasing philanthropic support the more impact they're having. So talk to me about the models of supporting journalism and the gap that has been left and where Spotlight appears to be succeeding in finding a different pathway forward.
They have been extremely entrepreneurial in their approach and extremely nimble in their approach, where they test and iterate things. They throw away what's not working. They dig in and deepen what they see adding value and see getting attention. And that level of philanthropic support has been able to go down as the level of individual donors, of planned giving, readership growth translating into donations and translating into sustained memberships has gone up. They're not at 100%. Obviously, it's going to take time, and maybe there's a world in which nonprofit news never gets there. But the role of philanthropy shouldn't be to pay all the bills forever. It should be to help these organizations get their start, to build some systems that work, to get their audience growing, and then draw down philanthropic support slowly. Outlets like Spotlight PA that, again, can really demonstrate their impact, that can do so in a way that is cross-partisan, are those that are going to succeed because they have the biggest tent of audience. They have an ability to show directly, materially, the impact that their work has in changing policy and holding power accountable. And I think it's those kinds of outlets that are going to benefit if we get to some form of public support, because they can show that it is truly in the public interest, that it's not in service of one ideology or another, and that's what it's going to take.
Yeah, and it came through again and again in the conversation with Chris, and his leadership and his passion to move through this, continuing to keep the eye on that prize. We are fortunate to have him in the ecosystem, to have them in the ecosystem.
And just another thing I'll say about Spotlight PA and about Chris Baxter's leadership is that they're not keeping their success and their best practices to themselves. They go out and meet with other media outlets and they share what's working. They're very public about it. They know that they can't succeed in an ecosystem that is failing. They need everyone's boats to be lifted by the success they're having. They're trying to lift the entire field. They're not just doing this so that they alone can succeed.
And ironically, that is one of the reasons they're succeeding.
Yes, it is.
So a positive feedback loop for once in the field of journalism. Matt, thank you.
Thanks, Chris.